Hello, I want to take just a moment to address some of the questions I've gotten recently about the freedom of the will, especially in response to those who hold to what's called compatibilism. I think probably the biggest proponent of this kind of thinking is Jonathan Edwards, and is made more popular by men like RC Sproul. For example, while teaching on the concept of human free will, Dr. RC Sproul wrote this, quote, "The crux of the matter lies in the relationship between the choice and the desire or disposition. Edwards' thesis is that we always choose according to the strongest inclination or disposition of the moment. Again, not only can we choose according to our strongest desires, but we must choose according to our strongest desires of the moment. Such is the essence of what freedom, and I'm able to choose what I want when I want it." And so what he's arguing ultimately is that our desire or our inclination determines what choice we make. That we have this greatest, strongest inclination is what he refers to it as. And we must choose according to our strongest inclination at any given moment. Now, what this ultimately does is it makes inclinations determinations. Instead of inclinations just inclining the will to act in one way or another, or influencing the agent in one way or another, instead what Edwards has proposed is that inclinations actually make determinations. In other words, the inclination is the effective cause of the choice, of the determination itself. What we as traditionalists have typically argued is that that is more of instinctive kind of reactions. Those are not moral choices. It's not a good description of a moral choice. That's a description of an instinctive reaction. An animal acts instinctively because his greatest preset desire causes his reaction, and it's not a moral choice. And so what we would say instead is that desires act as influences or inclinations on the agent, that the agent himself makes the determination. In other words, he chooses which of his competing desires he will act to fulfill. So I have the desire to exercise, and I have the desire to not exercise, or to be lazy, or to relax, or whatever. Those are two competing desires. And I am the responsible moral agent who chooses either to act to fulfill this desire or this desire. The desire itself does not determine which choice I will make. The desire itself, or the inclination itself, influences me as the determinative agent. So the cause of a choice is the chooser. The cause of a determination is the determiner himself. The inclinations or the desires, when it comes to moral choices, are just that. They're inclinations. They incline the will. R.C. Sproul goes on to write, "To choose according to the strongest desire or inclination of the moment means simply that there's a reason for the choices I make." At one point, Edwards defined the will as the mind choosing. The actual choice is an effect or result which requires an antecedent cause. Do you hear what he's saying? What he's arguing is he's arguing from Edwards' thesis, that the actual choice is merely an effect of the inclination. So the inclination or the desire, that strongest inclination, is the cause, the ultimate cause of the choice, which is the effect. We wouldn't say it that way. We would say that the desire or the inclination influences the agent, and the agent is the direct cause of his choices. The cause of a choice is the chooser. The cause of a determination is the determiner. The agent themselves are the determiners. The desires or the inclinations merely act as influences upon that agent. That's what separates us from the animals. That's what makes us responsible if I go sleep with my neighbor versus if my cat goes sleeps with the neighbor's cat. See the difference? I mean, obviously, I'm held morally accountable to that, but not because my desires don't determine my actions, like a cat would. I have a moral responsibility to choose to act to fulfill this desire or to refrain from fulfilling that desire, and therefore I'm held morally responsible for it. So if I go on to read from Sproul here, if all effects have causes, then all choices likewise have causes. If the cause is apart from me, then I'm a victim of coercion. If the cause is from within me, then my choices are self-determined or free. And so what Edwards and Sproul are ultimately arguing for is the free responsibility of the human agent from the compatibilistic standpoint, which is to say that because the desire is my desire, and if that desire is determining my choice, then it's free or you're responsible for it. But still, once again, I think he fails to develop the true understanding of self-determined will, in that the desire itself is not making a determination. It is not the effective cause of the determination, that the agent themselves is the effective cause. And how that agent comes about making that particular choice is a mystery beyond full comprehension. Libertarian free will activists regularly promote that and explain that. And to ask what determined the free moral agent to make a particular choice is actually begging the question, because it assumes that someone besides the agent is the direct and only cause of that choice. And I think that's important to understand as well. So he goes on to write, and he gives a good example of this. So I want to read this because he gives an actual example of choices. Think about Edwards' thesis that we always choose according to the strongest inclination or desire of the moment. Think, if you will, of the most harmless choice that you might make on the course of a day. Perhaps you attend a meeting of a group and choose to sit on the left side or the third seat on the end of the fourth row, front of the room. Well, why did you choose to sit there? In all probability, when you entered the room, you did not engage in a thorough analysis of your seating preferences. You probably did not make a chart to determine which is the best seat. Your decision was probably made very quickly, with little or no conscious evaluation, and with a sense of apparent spontaneity. Does that mean, however, that there was no reason for your choice? Perhaps you sat where you did because you were comfortable on the left side of the room in such meetings. Perhaps your seat section was governed by forces outside of your control. Perhaps, for example, your seat was the only seat left in the room, so that you had no choice in the matter at all. But is that even completely true? Or the option to leave the meeting altogether still there? Or the option to stand in the back was still there? But you chose to sit in the only seat available because your desire to sit was stronger than your desire to stand or to leave. So do you see the analogy, at least that Sproul is giving here? Is that when you walk into a room, you have the ability to leave that room if it looks full. If there's one seat available, you have the ability to stay. And that greatest, what he's saying is ultimately your greatest desire, your strongest inclination at that moment of choice is what determines your action, whether you will sit or whether you will leave or whether you will stand. What I'm saying is no, those inclinations may influence you as the agent, but you as the agent are the one who's making the determination as to whether to stay or to leave, as to whether to sit or to stand. Those inclinations or those desires may influence your determinative process and the deliberation that you do, but ultimately it's the agent themselves who make the determination on which of the competing desires they will act upon. So it's kind of circular reason whenever the compatibilist says, well, a person is making the choice based upon his strongest, greatest desire, and then you ask the question, well, why was that his strongest, greatest desire? Well, because he chose it. Well, he chose it because it was strongest, greatest desire, or it was his strongest, greatest desire because he chose it. It's just a circular reasoning, and it has no basis really in true logic. It just simply gives an explanation as to why one may choose this over that. And what we're not arguing here is that people don't act without reason. People may list some of those influential factors as reasons. I have a bad hip, and so standing would hurt me, and therefore I chose to sit down. There are reasons for that person coming to that decision, but the reason, that influence of the hip, did not determine the choice. The agent themselves determine the choice. So when you make a desire determinative, when you make an inclination more than just something that inclines, but instead something that determines or causes effectually, you've turned inclinations into instincts. And instincts are not morally accountable. You're not morally held accountable for instinctive reflexes that you have. If something comes right at your face, your eyes are naturally going to blink. We don't hold somebody responsible for that morally because they're acting instinctively. We don't hold a lion morally responsible for choosing meat over lettuce, or a rabbit morally responsible for choosing lettuce over meat. We understand that they were created that way with the greatest preset, strongest inclinations towards those foods. And therefore, we don't hold them morally accountable. What separates us from animals and what separates animal instinct from moral choices is that we, as the moral free agents, have the ability to choose to act to fulfill competing desires within each of us as moral creatures. And God has given us, even from the fall, the ability to know the difference between right and wrong. We have a conscience given within us that we know the difference between right and wrong. We know that God exists, that his eternal attributes, his qualities have been made clearly known. And therefore, when we reject him and we reject his clear revelation and we reject his truth, we're not acting in accordance with this strongless inclination that is determined by something beyond our control. Instead, we are choosing to act among one desire versus another desire, and therefore we're held morally responsible if we trade God's truth in for lies, as opposed to accepting his truth and submitting to it. So that's why we say that mankind is morally responsible instead of just instinctive in their reactions towards God and his revelation. Hopefully this has been helpful. Thanks.